Okay, great. All right. Well, thanks for your willingness to do this conversation today. I appreciate a lot of the stuff that you've been doing and the stuff you post on Twitter. And I guess I just wanted to get started with, we can just introduce ourselves to anyone that may be watching this later. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Absolutely. So my name's Jenna Cross, and I'm the director. My husband and I co-direct our local pregnancy resource centers in Wisconsin. And so we have two locations. We have a big focus on reaching abortion-minded clients and seeking to give them the truth and empower them to choose life. And we also have a maternity home that we run and are looking at getting a mobile clinic going as well. So a few different things that we're involved with pro-life organizations across our state in working to help increase our effectiveness as we work together.
Great. And you're also a registered nurse and a sonographer,
Yes.
is that right?
Yep, an RN and sonographer. So I have been able to meet with a lot of women who are planning to have abortions and have learned a lot through that, as far as what we can kind of imagine, right, what those women might be going through or what that might look like. But having experienced it firsthand has given me a lot more perspective, and is what has made me really interested and excited about what the abolitionist movement is doing, because I think that, and this is one of the things that I've talked about on Twitter, I think that one of the most helpful things for women would be if there actually were equal protection laws that would provide consequences to them for choosing abortion. I think that the fact that it's so easy and actually pushed as a good thing for them to do, and even the pro-life side saying, well, we shouldn't even consider penalties for the mom. I just think, well, it would make their decision so much easier if that was actually the case. So I think that would be such a mercy to moms to actually not have to be weighing this decision that in most cases, well, in all cases, it stays with them the rest of their life. And then you see really kind of one of two directions after that, where it causes a significant hardening of their hearts. And that's where I think you see the strong kind of champions of abortion that are shouting their abortion and pushing for it. Most of those women have had abortions in their past, and they're trying to make it okay. They're trying to
justify it, right?
Justify it, exactly. Or women totally kind of fall into just this shame, won't talk about it. I mean, we've had women who now we're trying to do more post-abortion recovery retreats and things like that. And women have come up to us at churches and told us about abortions they had 30, 40 years ago that they've never talked about. And they've kind of lived in this shame, trying to tell themselves, oh, God has forgiven me, it's okay, but it's just a lifelong regret. And so we know that there's these ramifications. And so I think the best possible thing would be to make it very difficult for a woman to make that choice. And equal protection laws would do just that, along with, of course, as Christians, we know that it's the only right thing to do, is to have equal protection. So that's my thoughts on that.
And you're also a mom as well yourself.
Yes, mom of 6 children. So
that's great. Awesome. Well, I don't know where this video is going to end up, so I'll introduce myself as well. Bradley Pierce. I'm an attorney, practice constitutional law, and do a lot of parental rights defense, and then also the president of the Foundation to Abolish Abortion and Abolish Abortion Texas, and draft legislation to do this and speak on this. And so it's something I've been fighting for a while. And I love to see how God uses people on different fronts, and how, we need the body of Christ in lots of different places, serving in lots of different roles. This is certainly a very big enemy giant that we're fighting. And I'm just glad to know that you're out there fulfilling the calling that God's given to you. And And but this is something that we all need to talk about as a society, and we all need to have an opinion about. And as Christians, we all need to be seeking, God, how would you have me to love my preborn neighbor? There's something that all of us can do, and so I appreciate your willingness to have this conversation. And I'm also a husband to my wife Cindy and father of our 10 children, and so looking forward to this conversation here. So you posted the other day on Twitter, and you said some things that I thought were really great questions. And I thought, you know what, instead of just replying to these, I think a conversation is in order here, because some of these may take a little bit to flesh out. And I think these are things that there are questions that a lot of people have that are just hearing about abolition, or maybe they're hearing about equal protection, they're on board with it, but they have these exact same questions about kind of maybe other aspects of abolition, not just equal protection, but why is it? Well, I'll just state your questions for you.
Right.
You said first, I agree with the abolitionist position except for two things. Number one, I don't understand why pro-lifers are seen as the enemy. There are countless very well-intentioned people working hard to save lives in the pro-life movement. Why not work to change hearts and minds with allies? Then number two, I don't understand the contempt of bills that limit abortion. The argument seems to be that God hates partiality, which is true, and those laws sentence some babies to death, also true. However, um, CA is certainly worse for babies, or California is certainly worse for babies than Florida, right? I get the end goal and agree, but right now, babies who otherwise could have been killed will be saved in Florida. It's not nearly enough. Women must be held accountable under the law and abortion banned from the moment of conception. Abolitionists are the ones who see that clearly, and I support that. I've read the position papers, and those two things evade my understanding. Perhaps some of my abolitionist friends could weigh in. So here we are.
Here we are. Thank you so much.
So yeah, so that's what led us here. So your first one, I don't understand why pro-lifers are seen as the enemy. Can you tell me a little bit about what you mean by that and kind of what you've seen that's led you to that?
Certainly. So, as a whole, I would say my experiences interacting with many of you have been very positive. And I wouldn't say that that's been the case with many of who I have kind of figured out are more of the leaders of the movement. However, there also always seems to be a pretty strong contingent of people who come in very aggressively on different
I saw a little bit of that in the actual
even in that post. Yes.
Which I saw somebody actually deleted I saw they deleted
Yes.
their tweets there. Yeah.
I was like, you can't help yourselves, even in this post where I'm saying, why do you do this?
Right.
So, and I understand feeling very passionately about this issue. We should, as Christians, feel passionately, speak boldly. But I think it's been a surprise to me, because I feel like I'm pretty much aligned with your way of thinking in at least a lot of cases. So I'm kind of like, if I am really close to aligning with you, but you're kind of jumping all over me on things,
Right.
then what are people experiencing that aren't in the place yet of saying, yes, we should have equal protection? No, the women are not always victims, and we shouldn't make that assumption. And we're actually wrong to not put more protections on this that would actually stop women from making this horrible decision.
Right.
So that makes me feel like, where is the strategy coming from, and why aren't we trying harder to reach out to people who are already recognize the evil that abortion is to some degree and could be convinced to take it further?
Right.
But they're probably going to be pretty turned off by some of these aggressive tactics. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think part of it is what you said. This is certainly a subject matter that people do get passionate about, that people should get passionate about. And sometimes our passions, for doing the right thing and loving, can get away from us, and we can get a little too passionate. And it's kind of like the Bible talks about, be angry but do not sin.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that I think, I hope that more people would have righteous indignation over this particular issue. But do not sin. We still need to walk in the fruits of the Spirit. Still need to exercise patience, kindness, gentleness. In how we communicate with one another, and make sure that we're being Christian in the way that we're dealing with people who may disagree with us. Um, and I think that's part of it. So part of it, I think we just have to be charitable with one another. That there's people that are passionate, and I appreciate that they're passionate. And so that in other contexts you may call them like cage stage. Um, but again, this is a very serious issue, and so I
Mm-hmm.
try to have a lot of charity with people who are, you know, um, being perhaps overzealous in the way that
Yeah.
they're being very aggressive, like you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about. While at the same time, we do need to, you know, be sure that we're careful, and we're
Mm-hmm.
loving in the way that, and we're most of all Christian in the way that we deal with people. I think, when your particular question, why are pro-lifers seen as the enemy? Um, there's a couple things about that. I think, and I'm sure you would even agree with this. There's pro-lifers, and then there's pro-lifers,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's kind of people who would call themselves pro-life. You may call them the grassroots pro-life, which are just your basic everyday American Christian person who wants to see abortion end, and so they call themselves pro-life, and that's what they are. And then there's the pro-life industry, some may call it, or the pro-life establishment, which would be, I would call it more of like the pro-life lobby. The pro-life, those who are actually pushing bills and policy. Um, you know, kind of those pro-life organizations. Um, and then you also have like other pro-life leaders, but they're not necessarily in kind of the lobby area. They're in kind of what you're the kind of things that you're in,
Mm-hmm.
counseling women, reaching women, providing truth about when life begins, maybe writing academic articles, right? So there's kind of pro-lifers all over the place. I think the main, you know, when it comes to like enemies, using that word, why are they seen as an enemy? It's generally directed at the pro-life lobby, that is the organizations and them. That's not to say that they're not pro-life, for people who call themselves pro-life, who don't have problems, who are pro-life but really in name only, and they don't really do much, and they're apathetic, and
Right.
they don't really care enough to learn about the issues, and so there's plenty of that going on as well. But what we're not against, when we try to draw a distinction between pro-life and abolition, it's not against really what the term pro-life means, for life, right? Obviously, we're all for life. But historically, what the pro-life movement, when it comes to policy, has been about is, not standing up to the Supreme Court, you
Mm-hmm.
know, following the court instead of following the Constitution. And so that's been a problem that we as abolitionists have had, with them. Hey, we need to obey God rather than men. We need to obey the Constitution rather than a creature of the Constitution. Now that's all now somewhat academic and moot, since the Supreme Court has overturned the Roe decision. We're grateful for that. So now it's kind of the rest of it, which is, when it comes to policy, we believe we should be providing equal protection of the laws, which is a simple concept that, hey, the same laws that protect my life and your life as born people from homicide should be the same laws to protect us before we're born from
Mm-hmm.
homicide, and our children and other people's children, from homicide before they're born. And where a lot of it is, there's certainly where abolitionists have had confrontations with the pro-life lobby, um, but it's also kind of gone the other direction as well. That the pro-life lobby has called us the enemy, and has called
Mm-hmm.
us the opponents, and has made us their enemies, by attacking us, by
Mm-hmm.
killing our bills,
Mm-hmm.
by saying all manner of evil things about us, and saying, just kind of slandering us. So there's that as well. So I think that's part of what you're seeing. So I don't think that it's. I think what the rest of your question, you said there are countless very well-intentioned people working hard to save lives in the pro-life movement. Why not work to change hearts and minds with allies? And there's and I would say there's kind of both, right? There's a lot of very well-intentioned people working hard to save lives. That certainly that's what I want to do. I want to reach out to those people. I do think that they're well-intentioned, and I think that if brought the truth, that they will come around, that they will come to see the truth and the righteousness of equal protection.
Yeah.
And so I certainly want to be patient with them. Then there are those who are not that, right? They're attacking, and so we have that. So that's kind of why when we talk about the pro-life movement, we're obviously it's an overgeneralization because hey, there's lots of different people in the movement. There's lots of different people hold different positions, but the pro-life kind of the establishment pro-life leaders in the movement, the National Right to Life, the March for Life, the large organizations that really do a lot of the policy work in the pro-life movement are anti-abolitionist and are anti-equal protection, and so that's why that's why we certainly do oppose a lot of the things that they do. And there's one other difference, that is that um, there's a lot of times it's not just that hey, we have differences of strategy. It's that so to use a lot of times people use the example of like a football field, like hey, we're all headed to the same end zone here. It's just y'all want to throw Hail Marys and we're willing to get 1 yard at a time. It's like it's not that exactly, and that kind of gets to your second question, but
Yeah.
but it's not that's not exactly it. But on your first question, we actually have a different end zone when it comes to the general pro-life establishment lobby. Their end zone is I would say abolishing abortion clinics, or abolishing abortion methods and means, but not actually abolishing abortion in the sense that abortion is illegal for everyone, right? Like I posted the other day, right? Being an abolitionist just means I hold the extreme position that murdering anyone should be illegal for everyone. I mean, that's seems pretty simple to me, but yet the pro-life lobby does not agree with that. They're not trying to make murdering anyone illegal for everyone. And so that's kind of where we actually have different end zones. And you see that after the Dobbs decision, in that we have now about 13 states that a lot of the pro-life lobby has, and a lot of the pro-life media has declared to be abortion free, like Texas, where I live here, and it's not abortion free. There's the abortion clinics are gone, but there's still, I would say, and we can talk about this a little bit, but just as many abortions happening, just as many Texas babies being aborted today as there were, or almost as many being aborted as there were. So that's not what we mean when we say abolish, and so that's why we really have two different end zones.
Yeah.
Does that answer that first question, or do you have more questions based on that?
No, that's good.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I think more will probably have more, well, what you just said there, as far as just as many abortions happening, or likely close to as many. That's something that I've heard a fair amount, is that, well, these laws don't actually limit abortions at all. They don't do anything at all, because then people just are having abortions earlier, or doing, which I just haven't found that to be the case. I mean, I will say I agree with you that it's not like, oh, we had tons of abortions and now we have almost no abortions. That's not the case at all. There's still a lot of abortions, and certainly it's way too many. And really the only way to bring that number down is equal protection laws. But I don't think it's right to say it makes almost no difference, because I haven't found that to be the case. So we have we didn't have a law in Wisconsin, and then after Dobbs, we had an old law on our books from 1849 that banned abortions with no exceptions for rape and incest. So it closed our abortion clinics, made it harder to get abortions in Wisconsin. We're really close to Chicago or Illinois, so people can travel there quite easily. But even with that, we've seen the difference that it makes when there are more hoops to jump through. That it does, we found, make a difference.
Yeah.
In,
Has there been, tell me about what that looks like as far as women that y'all are counseling?
yeah, it just, we find the increased difficulty to either order pills. Certainly they can still order pills, but there is a recognition that these pills are coming internationally. There isn't much regulation of that. So I'm nervous about doing that. I'm skeptical about doing that. So that just that it's not, they can't order them from what they would consider a reputable source in the US has seemed to make some difference. And just the distance to travel to Illinois for if they're going to want to actually go to abortion clinic or receive a surgical abortion, it gives them enough pause for us to be able to more often be able to help them with whatever circumstances they're having that are making them think about abortion. So it just, yeah. So I agree and disagree, because I agree that the difference is fairly minimal. I don't know if maybe it's more in a place in Wisconsin that's even further from a place to go. I'm not sure, but certainly I would say lives are being saved. And that to me is worth being thankful for, even though, I agree that it's not enough. And if people think, oh, it's banned, it's done, there's no abortions in Wisconsin, that's like very not true, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And so that I think is where it's easy to exaggerate one way or the other, I feel. So
Right. Yeah.
that's where my difficulty with, okay, I think that it's great that Florida passed to me, I was like, why do they have a 15-week ban in Florida when they could obviously do much better than that?
Right.
It seems. I want them to have an abolition. I mean, really, when I started looking into this more was after what happened in Louisiana, and I was shocked that they could have had an abolition bill, and it was the pro-life movement that, and so
yeah,
I see that, but then it's hard for me to feel like, well, we can't even say, oh, it's good that more babies are going to be saved in Florida, because it's more restrictive, that the baby that's 8 weeks along now that would have been easily able to obtain abortion, it's going to be a little bit harder now for that baby's mother to choose that. I think that's a good thing. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, you bring up the Louisiana case. I forgot to mention that. Kind of the answer to number one there is the obviously, hey, we had an abolition bill, and we had 77 pro-life organizations signed a letter that killed that bill, and they sent it just hours before the bill was being debated on the Louisiana House floor, and so it killed that bill. But they also sent it to every other state legislator in the whole country, so that they kind of, it's kind of one of those moments that they'd been killing bills, before that, but that was that's whenever they really took abolitionism seriously. Like, okay, guys, we need to get together and team up and squash this thing.
Yeah.
And so again, that's why, again, they view abolition as the enemy. And so even though, again, there's certainly well-intentioned people even on that list, in that case, we think that they, that what they did was sinful. Even if it was well-intentioned, it was still, a sinful thing to do. So, which,
even going back to the previous question, I mean, I think that that's something that I think it would be good for the abolitionist movement as a whole to recognize, when you're talking about pro-life the pro-life, when you're just saying, well, the pro-life industry doesn't want to stop abortions, and the pro-life industry doesn't, how that like
Right.
gears to a pro-life person is like, I'm pro-life and I want to stop,
Right. Yeah.
so I just think that messaging, and I know it's not possible to make it totally clear to everyone, but I just think, well, yes, there are the big organizations and the big kind of players in that, but they all are beholden to people like us who run the
Right.
day to day in the pro-life movement. And if we actually can get the message out in a way that pro-lifers can hear and think, yeah, well, absolutely, that's what I want. And I can't believe that the pro-life establishment doesn't actually want that. That was it for when I realized we have different end zones. We do. We don't.
Right.
We do. And yikes, that's not okay.
Yeah.
We
Well,
have to let the message be heard loud and clear that no, we want this done. We
yeah.
don't
Well, and
just want
I think part of what you're seeing there is a intentional attempt to when it comes to terminology,
Mhm,
right? And that is to create a distinction between the term abolition and the term pro-life. Again,
mhm,
not that for life is itself bad, and not that abolition is itself exhaustive, right? I mean, I'm an abolitionist, but I don't just want to abolish abortion. I also want to, help women and help children and adopt and things like that. So you know, the, so the terms are always, both helpful, but at the same time they're unhelpful. But I think there is or I know there is a intention among many to create a new label or to use a label abolition to help to define this distinction, and so that's why they use the term pro-life or the pro-life industry and say, hey, the pro-life movement is for this, so that people who say, well, wait a second, I'm not for that, it's like, oh, well, then you're an abolitionist, right?
mhm,
If you're not for that, but you are for equal protection, then and you're doing it, not just for science or health or human rights, but you're doing it as a Christian for the glory of God because these children are made in His image. Okay, you're an abolitionist. Then
mhm.
you may not call yourself that, but that's what we're going to call you. And
Yeah,
and so that it helps to, again, none of labels are labels, and they have their limits, but when there's a lot of abolitionists who think that we don't want to use the term pro-life because it blurs the lines, and we want there to be distinct lines between those 77 pro-life organizations are trying to do and what they're and kind of their foundation for what they're doing and what we're doing over here.
yeah,
Even though we're obviously for life,
mhm,
we think it's helpful to have a distinctive label.
mhm.
And I think that's true. That said, that can also create confusion and that can create hard feelings, and there's that as well. So I totally sympathize with that. So I try to you know do that, but at the same time be careful about that. And and then there's people who still, people who I would say are abolitionists, but they still call themselves pro-life,
Yeah,
and and so it's just people are kind of all over the map on that. But I think it's helpful to have a separate label, while at the same time not overgeneralizing people who still use this label, but they still do agree with me, or they would if they, if I don't turn them off, right
right.
right off the bat. So I understand what you're talking about there.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think that again, that goes a bit to the second question as well, because I would say when I read the different things that abolitionists stand for, I was like, well, that's me. I'm that. But then I
Right.
think that it has kind of been made clear to me that you have to follow all of the tenets to be able to consider yourself an abolitionist. Even what I've said, like I want abolition. That's what I want.
Right.
And it's kind of like, well, if you if you are for incrementalism or even happy about an incremental bill,
Right.
then you don't get it, and
Right. Right.
you're outside the camp, so to speak. So,
Right. Right.
and so I think that that's, I know several people who have talked to about this, and in just discussions, it's like easily brought about. Yeah, equal protection laws are right. That's where we should be going. But I think that the incremental piece really is a barrier for some
Right.
people fully embracing the abolitionist.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Let's get into that one.
yeah, do it.
So yeah, you said there, I don't understand the contempt of bills that limit abortion, and then you go on from there. Um, and again, it's kind of like you talked about. It's kind of the whole anti-incrementalism aspect of abolitionists.
Hmm.
Lots of big words there.
Yes.
um, the the way that I describe, and again, this is another example in which labels are helpful, but then they can also create confusion. And I think the term incrementalism, um, I try not to use the term very often because I think it's more confusing than it is helpful. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody knows that these things happen step by step,
Hmm.
that they're going to happen step by step as far as the progress that we make, right? We get a committee hearing, then we get a bill passed in one house, then we get a bill passed in both houses, then we get a governor to sign it, then we get another state, then we get another state, right? There's going to be increments along the way. And there's increments of, okay, there's more and more people who support abolition along the way. This conversation is an increment to,
Yeah.
hopefully towards that. And so we all support increments. We all believe in sanctification of a Christian is a progressive thing that doesn't happen overnight. We're not instantly made Christ-like, at
Right.
least not in our in our actions. Certainly in the eyes of God, as far as our being cleansed from our sins, He views us as that and as holy, and I'm grateful for that. But as far as here on earth, living that out, I'm not Christ-like. I'm not where I need to be. But that said, there's still a standard, right? There's still the standard is still the same, that I may not measure up to, and generally most of it, I don't even yet know all the things, all the ways in which I don't measure up to the standard.
Mhm.
But God is progressively sanctifying me, and hopefully over time, or certainly over time, making me more and more like Christ, and I'm grateful for that. So to me, I view that kind of this in the same way, that yes, it's going to be increments, it's going to be step by step, it's going to be progressive in that sense, um, but the standard is the same, right?
Mhm.
The standard of God's law is unchanging, and that's what we should be declaring. That's what should be done, and it should be done immediately. You may hear abolitionists talk about immediatism, and again, it doesn't mean that we believe that the entire country overnight is going to abolish abortion, but it should,
Mhm.
right? I mean, it should.
Yeah.
That's what God demands
Mhm.
of our leaders, and so that's what we should be doing. And so that's what we call for. We call
Yeah.
for immediate abolition of abortion, and it should be equal protection, or as Scripture puts it, without partiality.
Mhm.
Without partiality in judgment. It's how God says, He tells judges throughout Scripture, "You shall not show partiality in judgment." So that's what we're getting at. So that kind of gets to my main point, which is on this, which is that I don't use the term incrementalism a lot. Um, what I prefer to talk about is compromising principles. I don't think we should support bills that compromise principles.
Mhm.
Again, compromise can be a great thing. I'm an attorney. We negotiate. You have contracts. You give a little. You give a little. Everybody's happy. Right. Compromise and negotiation are not. They're not inherently bad things, but they are when you're compromising principles. Right. When you're actually compromising a principle. Okay, that's when it is now something that you cannot do. As a Christian, I cannot agree to do something that God says that I should not do. And I cannot agree to support something that God says that he hates. And so that's where you get to, to these bills that you said, like you said, contempt of bills that limit abortion. It's not so much necessarily that they limit abortion, because there may be some bills out there, and I've certainly seen some bills that would limit abortion that I would think, yeah, we could still support that, like, defunding Planned Parenthood or something like that, that doesn't enshrine or codify something that God says he hates. So the difference with it, like with the Florida heartbeat bill, why you see abolitionists again, I think, and we can talk about the numbers here in a minute, but let's assume that the bill does save babies. Certainly, I praise God for that. I do praise God for that. I think you're going to see on the abolitionist side not really talking about that very much, and even kind of talking that down, because from the pro-life side, you see so much hyperbole on that. So I think you're going to see a reaction to that, sometimes an overreaction to that, and really talking the numbers down. Because, heartbeat bill passed here in Texas, and the pro-life organizations were saying 97% of baby abortions are gone, and 90 and now, after Dobbs, there's only 10 abortions in Texas last month. It's like, guys, no, no. And so that's why I think you'll see abolitionists like, I'm not gonna, I don't want to join the parade over here, that's overinflating that. And so I'm going to kind of react the other direction. So I think you certainly see that. But with the actual bills, for us, or for me, again, I can't speak for all abolitionists, but this is the way that I would put it, is, does the bill compromise principles? And I would say the Florida heartbeat bill does. And so for that reason, I believe it is something that God hates. And I know that's a strong statement, but God says explicitly in Scripture, there's a passage that a lot of people like to use when talking about the gospel. It's a wonderful passage. It says, it's in Proverbs, it says that those who acquit the guilty and those who condemn the righteous alike, God, that are an abomination to the Lord. Right? Those who acquit the guilty and those who condemn the righteous. That's an abomination to God. He hates that, just a serious hatred. And I mean, that's what the bill does, right? At its core, the bill, it acquits the guilty. It doesn't apply to the mother. Now it doesn't actually say that in the bill, so which is good. But that's the way that it works in Florida. It doesn't have to say it in the bill. That's the default in order to override that kind of court precedent. There's a court case out there, and I'm kind of getting in the weeds here, but there's a court case in Florida that says that mothers are immune from prosecution, period. And in order to override that, you have to have an explicit statement in the bill, explicitly overriding that. So the bill does not have that. So, so it's allowing, it's acquitting the guilty, and it is condemning the righteous, or condemning the innocent, I should say, because the children, are innocent, who have not yet made it to 6 weeks. And then it allows for, up to 15 weeks if there's a claim of rape or incest, which the claim, like a lot of states bills that have this rape and incest exceptions, even as an attorney, I look at that and I'm like, you could drive a Mack truck through that loophole,
right?
Because it just requires documentation, which, since it's not defined, could just be a mom signing an affidavit, or basically when she's filling out the medical forms at the abortion clinic, just signing one of the forms saying, I'm claiming rape or incest. So it's it has those problems, and then it also is not equal protection. And even for the abortionist, because it's only 5-year penalty.
Mm-hmm.
So even for the abortion doctors that are doing this, that's not the penalty. That's not what the penalty is for murdering a born person.
Right.
And so
Mm-hmm.
there's this much lower penalty. There's this huge, gigantic loophole. There's completely condemning those who are not yet six weeks old, and so it's I believe that it shows partiality in judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And when God talks about that, and we have on our website, FAA.org, Foundation to Abolish Abortion, we actually have a page called Biblical Principles of Equal Protection. And it talks about this whole, I could list tons of scriptures on God saying, do not show partiality, but you can go find them there. Um, but it says it a lot. And to me, what partiality is do, you know, justice is supposed to be blind, right? If I have
Mm-hmm.
to remove the blindfold from justice in order to decide a case, based upon the identity of the parties, okay, now we're showing partiality, right? Is this a man or is this a woman? Is this is this person have this skin color or that skin color? Is this person popular or powerful or weak and poor or rich or beautiful or what I'm saying? That's what partiality is. Or in this case, is this person born yet or not?
Right.
Or is this person gotten to 6 weeks yet or not?
Yeah.
Or is this person, did they pay for the abortion? Are they the mother who paid for the abortion, or are they the one who carried out the abortion? Or are they the mother who ordered the pills and did it themselves? Or are they someone who provided the pills? That's where, really the laws about homicide are supposed to be about, homicide is two things, causing the death of another person with criminal intent. And that's what it should be about. It shouldn't be about the identity of the parties. And so that's where it's showing partiality. So that's the main reason why you're going to see abolitionists again hesitant to celebrate the
Mm-hmm.
lives that will be saved, kind of as a reaction against the hyperbole from the pro-life side,
Mm-hmm.
but then also opposing the bill itself because it's something that we believe that God hates. And
Mm-hmm.
though it may save some in the short term, I
Mm-hmm.
think even from a practical perspective, it's going to cost the deaths of many more
Mm-hmm.
because it actually ends up delaying abolition,
Right.
and it doesn't invite the blessing of God. That's our view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. What would you say about kind of looking at California and Florida and saying, because one of the comments was, well, this type of law hardens hearts, which I can understand too, for making compromise that does harden
Right.
hearts. But then if you look at it compared to a California where it's like, this is great, murder your baby, it's all
Right.
good. How would you look at those two things? Because it seems to me, or it has seemed like abolitionists will kind of look at them as the same or similar, and so that
Right.
fit is hard for me as well.
Yeah, and again, that's something else with abolitionists. Generally, abolitionists, it's kind of abolitionists versus pro-life in most of the
Mm-hmm.
states. So abolitionists are not as much taking on the pro-abortion industry,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Right.
because first of all, the pro-life movement's already doing that, and then they're already kind of exposing all the evils over there, or a lot of the evils. One of the problems though is that they're doing it inconsistently, and a lot of the pro-abortion movement sees that. I can't. I've even been at the Capitol several times, here in Texas and in other states. You're testifying and supporting a bill of abolition, or they're testifying kind of on or maybe even against a pro-life bill that falls short, or not falls short, but compromises principles and establishes things that are wrong. And a lot of times I've even seen the pro abortion people that have come out against pro-life bills, and they'll even say like, wait a second, y'all aren't being consistent. That you say that this is a person, you say it's murder, but you're not treating it that way. You people aren't really being consistent here. You're just really trying to control women's health care. And part of it's actually true, because they're even most pro-life bills, if you go look, they're not in the homicide code or in the penal code, they're in the healthcare code. And so it makes it, it looks like you are literally regulating women's healthcare, because that's what they're literally doing from a legal perspective. They literally are doing that. And they're not treating it like homicide. So there's that. The I think another issue with allowing or with states like Florida doing what they did, it's when a state passes a bill like that, a state who's it's Republican majority state with a Republican governor, and certainly grateful for Governor DeSantis, and he's a great example on a lot of fronts of what a governor should be. Nevertheless, in this area, you have there are a lot of people in that state, and there's people who govern the state that claim to be pro-life. And and now Dobbs is out of the, Roe versus Wade is out of the way. Dobbs is there. And wait, it's like nothing's changed, right? We're still, Roe is gone, but we're still passing a heartbeat bill. What are we doing here?
It has been very clarifying to see, it's out of the way and we're not doing anything differently. That is,
yeah. And I think bills like the heartbeat bill, one way that they do more harm than good, in addition to codifying things that God hates, I think even from a practical perspective, they do more harm than good, because they are providing cover for politicians that don't really want to end abortion. Mm-hmm. It's like someone mentioned there was one state that had a heartbeat bill, and someone asked the governor, like, well, what about women with rape and incest? It doesn't have an exception for that. And the governor said, oh, well, it still gives them 6 weeks. They still have 6 weeks to go do it. And same thing here. It's like, it doesn't end abortion. Hopefully it saves some, but you can still get an abortion. You just got to make your mind up faster and get it done faster. Mm-hmm. And it's the hurry up and get your abortion bill. And mm-hmm. So there's politicians who aren't really against abortion, who can support that, vote for that, campaign on that, get elected as being pro-life, but they're not actually interested in abolishing abortion. And now we've just, instead of exposing them for who they are, by forcing them to take a vote, and maybe we lose the vote, but now we've exposed all these charlatans. Now we've just continued to give them cover. And so a bill like this does that. And I think that's one reason why it delays abolition, because it continues to let these, anti-life, anti-equal protection people, stay in office and stay in power, and run as if they wanted to end abortion when they really don't. But mm-hmm. they can happily, or at least they can vote for a bill like this just fine, because it doesn't actually stop abortions, right? Every woman in the state can still get an abortion, mm-hmm. and they just have to do it a little differently, or do it a little bit faster. So that's another one of the problems with it.
Yeah, makes sense. So what is kind of your main hope or strategy in just reaching out to pro-lifers and getting the message out? I know that you have that brochure, Are You an Abolitionist? And I'm curious to know, knowing kind of what you know about me and my stances on things, would you consider me an abolitionist, or am I still with my questions?
Right.
Yeah. Well, where is that at? Is it a movement that is, you must, adhere to these things, or is there room for people who are on some type of spectrum of
well, it's kind of one of those, I don't want to be like the popish and be like, you are I now declare you an abolitionist or something like that. I would say when I use the term abolitionist, I do mean not only someone who supports equal protection, but someone who also not opposes increments, but
Mhm,
someone who opposes unrighteous increments, if you want to put it
mhm,
that way. Someone who opposes bills that codify things that God hates. So
mhm,
that's what I would say someone is an abolitionist. That those from a policy perspective, those two things,
mhm.
but also being an abolitionist is even, I would say, beyond that. And at its core, what being an abolitionist is, and I'm, I it sounds like you're already there on this,
Mhm,
and that is being a Christian, right? I
mhm,
mean, abolitionists, we don't want to just be, for us, abolishing abortion is not just about science, although we think science supports it, or about tradition, although tradition supports it, or
mhm,
health, again, although all those things support it. Why are we doing it? Because we love God and we
mhm.
love our neighbor, and God commands us to do that. And I'm yeah, are reminded of the book of James, talking about the second greatest commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. And James says, if you love your neighbor as yourself, if you follow the royal law, he puts it, and love your neighbor as yourself, you do well. But if you show partiality, you are transgressing.
Mhm,
And so that's why, it ultimately comes down to, being for equal protection, being against partiality. It all comes from seeking to honor God.
mhm,
And he says that loving your neighbor means no partiality.
mhm,
And you can't show partiality in judgment, and you can't show partiality in love.
mhm.
And so that's it, I mean, you know what I mean. You can show partiality in love as far as degrees of love, right?
Right.
Obviously, I love my wife way
Yeah.
more than I love strangers,
Mhm,
but we're called to love everybody, and
mhm,
without partiality based on whether they're rich or poor or born or preborn. And we don't just love them by, again, as Scripture says, we don't just say be warm and filled. We love them by actions, and certainly you're doing that, right? You're doing that, and you're loving with actions, and so that's what we're trying to do as well.
mhm,
And so again, for us, it is also, abolitionism is about the gospel.
mhm.
It's about how we love God and how we love others, and obeying Him. And again, it's not just, and again, a lot of the pro-life movement, at least historically, the pro-life movement has been, we're against abortion, and yeah, we're also Christians, many of us, but we're not going to argue. Generally speaking, the pro-life movement, at least the establishment, the lobby, the organization I'm talking about, um, they don't really argue against abortion based on scripture.
Right.
It's kind of one of those things like, oh, no, 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 this isn't a religious thing. It's like, well,
Mhm.
no, it is.
Yeah.
It
Yes.
is, though. It should be.
Right.
And so that's why, as an abolitionist, again, even if someone's for equal protection and they're against partiality, if they're not a Christian, then yeah, you're not an abolitionist.
Mhm.
So, again, I'm not gonna like declare that you're a Christian, but from everything I've heard, you certainly you certainly are. And so
Yes.
you've got that. But yeah, I would say generally an abolitionist, it's both opposing, or it's both supporting equal protection, but then also opposing partiality. So
Right.
that's something, for you to keep looking into, and if there's anything, any resources I can point you in that direction, let me know, and
Yeah.
whatever I can do
Great.
to help. That's what,
So,
again, that's what I'm trying to do, because I think there are a lot of people out there who do support abolition.
yeah.
They just
Mhm.
don't know it yet. And so
Mhm.
that's why we're trying to reach them, and
Mhm.
trying to overcome a lot of attacks and slander along the way.
Yeah. Makes sense. So would it be fair to say that your view on kind of what the laws, I don't know what to call them except for incremental laws that typically in the pro-life movement would be celebrated. You had said earlier, which I thought was helpful, that those laws passing could very well delay abolition from happening,
Right.
um, and in the long run, end up costing more lives as a result. So would that be kind of your position? Okay, we're going to give pro-lifers this 6-week bill to kind of appease them.
Right.
And
Yeah.
now people feel like, all right, we've done enough, because to your point, a lot of the pro-life movement aren't Christians. And so they're almost just kind of slower moving leftists, they're just a few
Right.
steps behind. So as it becomes more and more okay, the issue of abortion, and just kind of accepted,
Right.
we feel like we're doing enough by limiting it. And
Right.
what's the need then for equal protection bill? That
Right.
just seems extreme. Is that kind of what you would say?
Yeah. And every time we compromise principles, we hurt our own cause, right?
Yeah.
It's even back in 1973 in the Roe versus Wade decision, we didn't have equal protection even before Roe. And I know there are a lot of pro-life scholars that are like, well, we didn't even have it back then. That's why we shouldn't have it today. It's like, no, that's why we should have it today.
Right. Right.
Because we didn't have it back then, and look where that led.
Yeah.
And even the Supreme Court mentioned in Roe versus Wade, they said if a woman, they said, in arguing that a fetus is a person, Texas faces a dilemma. If the fetus is a person, why is the woman not a principal or an accomplice? And if the fetus is a person, why are the penalties different? That was in the Roe versus Wade majority opinion. That doesn't really get cited a whole lot. But it's like denying equal protection is part of what, that mindset. I'm not saying that argument necessarily, but that mindset is what led to that in the first place.
Right.
That we were being inconsistent, and the Supreme Court said, wait, you're arguing a fetus as a person, but your own bills don't even treat them like a person.
Exactly.
Actions speak louder than words. We're just going to do what you're not treating them like a person, so we're not going to either.
Yes.
And so that's kind of how we got here. And so we're not going to get out of this hole by digging in this, like continuing to dig. And that's what bills that deny equal protection continue to do. They don't treat a fetus like they're a person, and they hurt our arguments. They hurt our cause. They're inconsistent, and everybody can see it. And so that's a problem. Again, they provide cover for people who don't really want to end abortion. And again, I wanted to get around to the numbers here. I don't have this for Florida, but we're looking at states that have been declared abortion free by a lot of the pro-life media. And for example, in Texas, before the heartbeat bill we had, and then the Dobbs case, there were about 55,000 abortions in Texas. And the numbers we're looking at today shows there are at least 52,000 still happening. Now, about 63% of those are going out of state, but the remaining 37% of those, almost 20,000, over 19,000, are still happening in state on Texas soil from people ordering pills from out of state.
Yep.
So what we're seeing, and again, that's only from one pill provider. That doesn't even count all the other pill providers that we don't have any data on. We're seeing, even at most, I think being as generous as we can be, a 5.4% decrease, in Texas in abortions of babies being aborted. That doesn't abolish abortion. And that's another thing. And this is, I think, a very important thing, because you have a lot of voters out there who are, even passionate. They want to see abortion ended, and they see a bill like the Florida bill, and they say, okay, this is a step in the right direction, and there's going to be so many babies saved. And the pro-life movement majorly exaggerates the number of babies saved. And those people then think, okay, well, I can kind of chill somewhat, that, okay, we've done a lot of good. And in states like Texas, we have a trigger bill and a pre-Roe bill, like Wisconsin. Yeah. And it's like, oh, well, abortion's been abolished there. And that's what the pro-life movement's saying. But it's not. Right. We have over almost 20,000 still on Texas soil, not including the ones going out of state. That's not abolished, but there's always people that think it is. And so that's another problem with these bills, and why it delays abolition, because you have people who have this righteous indignation, and so they're calling on their legislators to do something about it. And then the legislators do something that appears to do something about it to the average voter, but it doesn't actually do it. And so it ends up sating that righteous indignation of people when really it shouldn't be. And that's why I know it's hard for people to hear this. I think it would be better if Florida had passed no bill at all. I mean, that's ultimately what we have to say, right? That's what
Mhm.
we're saying here. It would have been
Mhm.
better, not only because it would have been more obedient to God, to push for it and it die. Um, but the great thing about pushing for it and it dying is now we know who opposes it, right? Because they
Yeah.
had to vote against it. And then secondly, it doesn't sate that righteous indignation that people have. But right now in Florida today, I guarantee you, if it's like any other state that we've seen, the true passionate pro-lifers are patting themselves on the back and
Yeah.
declaring victory and thinking that most of the job is done,
Hmm.
and
Right.
it's going to affect how they vote and how passionate they are in that arena, and I think it's going to delay things.
Yeah. Very interesting perspective. I understand it. It's good. Yeah. I thought it was so interesting 2016 when Trump was campaigning, when he was interviewed. I'm sure you saw this when he
Yeah,
was interviewed about this and he was asked about abortion. It was like he didn't really know yet that the pro-life movement doesn't want any penalties for women. So
right.
he went where it logically goes. If we say pro-life is murder and now I'm pro-life, so yes, I want some penalties for women who abort. And he
Yeah.
said this on an interview and just got, you know,
Oh yeah.
straightened out quickly by the pro-life movement and had to come back and
Yeah.
retract that. I just thought it was so interesting. Here's a guy who hasn't been pro-life, now he's pro-life and he has to try to sound pro-life, so he's just saying what's
Right.
logically true in an interview, and then finds out, oh no, we're hypocritical on that in the
Yeah.
pro-life movement. We
Well,
don't
and
do we
that's
don't do that.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, you saw the pro-life movement on that. They were coming out and they were saying that's not pro-life. Right? That's
Exactly.
what they kept saying over
Yeah.
and over, and
Hmm.
that's why, to some extent, abolitionists are just like, okay, then I guess I'm not
Right.
pro-life. Okay, because I do support equal protection, and you're
Hmm.
telling me I'm not pro-life. That's why a lot of it, I say it's not even that we've left the pro-life movement; it's that we've been kicked out of the pro-life movement
Yeah.
because they say that supporting equal protection and wanting to protect babies the same way that our lives are, that's not pro-life.
Hmm.
Like, okay, well then I guess I'm not pro-life. I guess I'm an
Yeah.
abolitionist.
Right. Right. Well, and just as far as my own just course change on this, it wouldn't have been that many years ago that I would have said it. Yeah, of course not. We don't penalize mothers. We only
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
have punishment for the doctors, and thinking that that would solve it. So that's where I think most mainstream pro-life people just haven't been presented with these arguments. And that's
right,
where I would love to see where there is more of a push to, like, hey, let's change people's minds about this,
right.
and
Well, hey,
um
I've been grateful for you. I mean, you've put out a lot of great stuff on equal protection, supporting that, and I've been super grateful for that. I mean, you've seen. I don't know if you've seen. I mean, I've
yeah,
shared a fair bit of that.
yeah, absolutely, yep. I try to talk about it as much as possible.
Great.
So
Well, thank
and
you.
just in regular conversations as well. So I've hoped to change things from the inside, but we'll see.
Great.
So, yeah. Well, thank you so much for being willing to answer my questions and dialogue about it. Really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for your willingness to do this. And again, I hope this is helpful to anybody else listening in. And yeah, maybe we can do this some other time and have some more conversations. But I think this is what we have to do, because we
Yep.
do have to reach people who would agree with us if they were just exposed to this.
Right.
And I think the questions that you're asking are the questions that certainly that I was asking a few years ago,
Hmm.
and that a lot of people should be asking. And so I'm
Hmm.
grateful that you're open to having this conversation.
Appreciate it. Thanks
All
very much.
right, great. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Take care.
You too.